Minister Mark Carney is heading back to the White House next week to meet Donald Trump as challenges with the U.S. president remain as volatile as ever.
Canada and the U.S. have been locked in a trade war for months now with little visible signs of progress, and conservatives say they're sick of the prime minister going abroad.
To understand what's happening now, we need to rewind almost 80 years to the ashes of World War II. In 1944, the U.S. called the world's major powers to a sleepy town in New Hampshire, Bretton Woods. There, they built a new financial order with one unspoken rule. The world runs on dollars. Every barrel of oil, every shipment of wheat, every ton of steel, all priced and traded in greenbacks. And for decades, that system worked. The dollar became not just a currency, but a symbol of stability, power, and dominance. But somewhere along the way, America turned that privilege into a weapon. It started small. Sanctions here, trade restrictions there. But by the 2010s, Washington had learned it could crush entire economies without firing a single bullet. Cut a country off from the dollar system, and you cut off its oxygen. Iran, Venezuela, Russia, they all learned that lesson the hard way. But so did America's allies, because when the U.S. used the dollar to police the world, Europe realized something terrifying. If Washington can do it to them, it can do it to us. And that realization became the seed of rebellion.
The breaking point came in 2018. The U.S. pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, a deal Europe had spent years negotiating, and then slapped sanctions so broad that European companies were forced to obey American law, even when their own governments disagreed. Banks in Paris, Frankfurt, and Milan froze Iranian transactions overnight. European firms faced billion-dollar fines for simply doing business in euros. Washington called it foreign policy. Europe called it economic blackmail. So, behind closed doors, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom began building something new. A secret financial mechanism designed to bypass U.S. control. They called it Instex. On paper, it looked harmless, just a barter system for humanitarian goods. But make no mistake, it was the first open rebellion against the dollar system in over half a century. And while Instex publicly failed, privately, it sparked something that would change everything. Because it proved one thing: breaking free from the dollar wasn't impossible. It was just complicated. And Europe was ready to get complicated. After Instex came the real moves. Quiet, bureaucratic, almost invisible to the untrained eye. The European Payment Initiative, EPI, was born. A project backed by the biggest banks in the EU. Its mission? Build a homegrown payment network that doesn't rely on Visa, MasterCard, or the US banking system. Next came TIPS, the ECB's real-time settlement system. A technical marvel, allowing money to move instantly across Europe, in euros. No SWIFT codes required. Step by step, brick by brick, Europe was building its escape hatch from American financial dominance. And while Washington was busy fighting over debt ceilings and government shutdowns, Europe's central bankers were quietly connecting the dots, from energy trade to defense procurement to global finance. By 2024, more than 1,000 banks had joined the EPI framework. Cross-border trade between Europe and Asia increasingly settled without touching the dollar. And the US barely noticed, because this wasn't rebellion with flags and speeches. This was a technocratic revolution, silent, strategic, and irreversible. The dollar's true power doesn't come from Wall Street. It comes from oil. For 50 years, every drop of crude traded globally has been priced in dollars, the petrodollar system. That single fact forced every nation on Earth to hold U.S. currency, propping up demand for the dollar and financing America's trillion-dollar deficits. But something subtle started happening in 2023. France's Total Energies signed long-term contracts to buy Middle Eastern crude in euros. Italy began negotiating gas supplies from Algeria in euros as well. And when Russia's exclusion from SWIFT threw global energy trade into chaos, Europe suddenly realized, if we keep using dollars, we stay exposed. So they changed course. Now, energy deals are being quietly restructured, pipelines re-benchmarked, and reserves diversified. Not with public announcements, but with discrete clauses buried deep in contracts. The new goal? A euro-based energy market. The ultimate blow to the petrodollar. And if they pull it off, it's not just a policy shift. It's a declaration of monetary independence. While the dollar system still relies on banks, transfers, and intermediaries, Europe is playing an entirely different game: digital currency. In Frankfurt, the European Central Bank has been testing the digital euro, a programmable currency designed for cross-border use. Think about what that means. No need for dollar clearing. No need for American banks. No need for SWIFT. Transactions could move directly between European and Asian institutions in seconds, outside U.S. jurisdiction. And here's the twist. The ECB is in talks with several Asian partners, including Singapore and even China, to link their digital payment networks. If those systems ever go live together, SWIFT, the backbone of global dollar transfers, becomes obsolete overnight. Washington could wake up one morning to find that its most powerful financial weapon has simply vanished. The dollar has been America's invisible empire. Every global trade settled in dollars creates demand for U.S. currency. That demand lets Washington print money, fund wars, and run deficits without consequence. But what happens if that demand starts to fade? Experts warn that even a 10% shift away from the dollar could send shockwaves through U.S. markets. Higher inflation, weaker treasuries, and rising borrowing costs. And it's not just theory. Central banks worldwide are already cutting dollar holdings. In 2022, global dollar reserves dropped to under 59%, the lowest in decades. Meanwhile, gold reserves surged across Europe. France, Poland, and Germany quietly repatriated tons of bullion from New York and London vaults. They're not saying it out loud, but the message is clear. We don't trust the system anymore. And that distrust is spreading. Here's where the story gets truly explosive. Behind closed doors, Europe and China are building what insiders call the settlement triangle. Paris and Frankfurt are now home to yuan clearing hubs, allowing trade with China directly in local currencies. Meanwhile, Beijing has agreed to accept partial euro payments for key exports. In public, it's framed as diversification, but in private, analysts say it's something much bigger, a quiet alignment against dollar dominance. France and Germany see China not as a rival, but as a counterbalance to America's monopoly. And Beijing? It sees Europe as the perfect bridge to legitimize its own currency on the global stage. In this new monetary triangle, the US dollar isn't the centerpiece anymore. It's just one currency among many. And that's exactly how Washington loses control. Publicly, U.S. officials dismiss Europe's actions as symbolic. They say the dollar is still king. And technically, they're right. No other currency yet matches its liquidity or scale. But the real danger isn't immediate collapse. It's erosion. Power doesn't fall in a single moment. It fades, quietly, while everyone pretends nothing's changed. That's what's happening right now. Every trade settled in euros instead of dollars chips away at America's leverage. Every contract written outside the SWIFT network weakens U.S. reach. Every ton of gold moved out of American vaults is one less reason to trust the dollar. And while U.S. leaders argue over budget bills, Europe is already writing a new chapter, one where the dollar is optional, not essential. By the time Washington realizes what's happening, the network will be complete. The petrodollar will be gone. And the global economy will have quietly shifted into a multi-currency world, one that no single nation controls. The dollar's dominance was never just about money. It was about power. The power to decide who trades, who profits, and who suffers. But that power came with an invisible condition: trust. Trust that America would remain stable, predictable, and responsible. Now, after decades of sanctions, shutdowns, and political chaos, that trust is fading. Not among enemies, but among allies. Europe isn't waving flags or burning bridges. It's doing something far more dangerous: building an alternative. A future where energy, defense, and global trade no longer orbit the dollar. A world where Washington's financial reach stops at its own borders. And once that world exists, even partially, the old order will never return. Because control can be enforced, but trust must be earned. So the question isn't whether the dollar will fall tomorrow. It's whether America can adapt before it loses the very system that made it powerful. Do you think Europe can truly break free from the dollar's shadow? Or will the US strike back before it's too late?